Hi, I'm Jake, 32, and last month my life blew up when my brother, jokingly, ruptured my abdomen at a family barbecue, and I ended up in emergency surgery fighting for my life. What followed wasn't a dramatic confrontation or some explosive family fallout, at least not right away. It was quieter than that. Quieter, and far more permanent. Here's what really happened. It started on a Saturday that looked like every other. My family does this annual lake house thing near the end of summer. Burgers, beer, deck chairs, too much sunscreen, everyone pretending we're more functional than we are. I didn't even want to go, honestly. My gut had been off for weeks. And yeah, 8 months earlier I'd had laparoscopic surgery to repair an abdominal hernia. Nothing dramatic, just one of those procedures you have to respect afterward. Recovery takes time, tissue needs to heal, you have to listen to your body. And I had. I took the full 6 weeks off the gym. I moved slow. I skipped hikes with friends. I even brought it up at dinner once, thinking maybe if I named it enough times, my family would remember it mattered. My brother Ethan didn't listen. He never really had to. Ethan's one of those guys who floats through life untouched by consequence. Big energy, big voice, big presence. He's the type who'll wrap you in a bear hug before asking if you're comfortable with being touched. He's never malicious, just careless in a way that only privilege can afford. That weekend, the lake house was full. Neighbors popped by. Family friends came up from the city. My parents were in peak holiday mode, already on their third round of margaritas by 3 p.m. And Ethan, he was in his element. He was performing. There was a moment, near sunset, when someone suggested a group photo on the deck. Everyone lined up, crowding together, laughing too loudly. And then Ethan stepped behind me. I felt him before I saw him. 2 hands on my sides, strong and sudden, lifting and twisting me off the ground like it was all part of a game. He shouted something. I don't even remember what. Something dumb and loud and meant to make people laugh. And they did. Because why wouldn't they? But I felt it. A tearing. A pull. A white-hot bolt of pressure ripping through the left side of my abdomen. I didn't scream. I couldn't. The breath left me so fast I barely managed a sound. He set me down and laughed. Whoa! Don't die on me, drama queen! And then people really laughed. And I laughed too. Because what else was I supposed to do? I told myself maybe it was just a spasm. Maybe a stitch or scar tissue. I walked inside, gritting my teeth through the nausea and dizziness and the bloom of hot, rising pain. My mother barely looked up from the sink. You okay? Yeah, I lied. Just tired. But by midnight I was curled on the couch, sweating and shaking, vomiting bile into a paper towel, and whispering to no one, something is wrong. It would be hours before anyone believed me. And by then, it would be almost too late. The first time I asked to go to the hospital, my mother said I needed to lie down and rest. The food was rich. She said, gently patting my shoulder like I was a fussy toddler. It's probably just indigestion or anxiety. You always overthink things. I was doubled over at that point. Cold sweat had soaked through my shirt. My legs kept cramping, and the pain in my side had gone from a hot stab to something deeper, heavier. Like a balloon inflating slowly beneath my skin. And still, I tried to downplay it. Because in my family, escalation is a sin. If you raise your voice, you're too emotional. If you call out behavior, you're making a scene. If you ask for help too loudly, you're doing it for attention. Ethan was in the kitchen pouring shots for our cousins, laughing like a guy who didn't just possibly rupture his brother's abdomen. Every time I looked his way, he avoided my eyes. I managed to stand, eventually, and whispered to my dad, I need to go to the ER. I think something tore. He sighed. Not angrily, just with the kind of disappointment that's more effective than shouting. Jake. Son. You've always been sensitive. Don't let Ethan's dumb joke get in your head. You'll feel better in the morning. I wanted to scream, this isn't in my head. But I didn't. Instead, I sat back down. And then I vomited. Violently. That finally got attention, but not the kind I needed. People grimaced. Someone brought me a towel. Ethan said, Whoa, okay, buddy. Maybe cut back on the IPA next time, huh? And I hated how natural it sounded. How easily he reframed it like I had overindulged, not like I was actively falling apart from the inside out. I started shivering then. Not like a chill, but deep, full-body tremors I couldn't control. That's when the neighbor knocked. She'd come to return a serving platter and heard me through the open window. She took one look at me on the couch, gray, hunched, barely coherent, and said, "I'm calling 911. My mother rushed to stop her. "He's just worked up. He doesn't need that." But the neighbor wasn't from our world. She wasn't fluent in our language of minimization. She said flatly, "This man is in medical distress. Step aside." Ethan scoffed. My father muttered something about overreactions. But it was already too late. The neighbor made the call. And when the EMTs arrived, they listened. They didn't ask if I was being dramatic. They didn't need me to smile through it. They looked at my blood pressure, the bruising starting to bloom beneath my ribs, the way I couldn't speak more than a few words without gasping. And they said, "We need to go. Now." Ethan rolled his eyes. "Come on, are you serious?" One EMT turned to him and said, calm but firm, "Sir, we're very serious. Please move." And just like that, the power in the room shifted. As they lifted me onto the stretcher, I heard my mother crying softly in the kitchen. I wasn't sure if it was fear or shame. My father stood stiffly by the fridge like a man who wasn't used to being proven wrong. And Ethan? He didn't say a word. Because deep down, he knew. He'd pushed too far. And this time, the body pushed back. They said later that if I'd waited another hour, I probably would have died. That sentence hit different the second time I heard it, when I was fully awake, tubes in my arms and a metallic taste of oxygen still coating my mouth. The first time, in the ambulance, it barely registered. I was drifting in and out, catching fragments, BPs dropping, likely internal bleed, get trauma on standby. But the second time? The surgeon said it calmly, like it was just a clinical update. "You were minutes from critical," he told me. "Another hour and we'd be having a different conversation." That conversation sat in my chest like an anchor. Because here's the truth no one says out loud when you grow up in a family like mine: you don't expect to be believed. You expect to survive in spite of being ignored. I was lying in recovery when I first asked, "Did the scan show how it happened?" The surgeon nodded. "Yes. It's consistent with force applied to a structurally weakened abdominal wall. Direct torque to the left side. The tear lined up exactly with the prior surgical site." I stared at him. "So, not random?" "Not random," he repeated. "Not something that happens spontaneously. It takes force. Enough to rupture already compromised tissue." He paused, then asked, "Did you fall?" "No," I said. My brother lifted me. Twisted me. It was supposed to be a joke. He just nodded again and said, "We'll document that." And that's when it shifted. Because for the first time in my entire life, someone outside the family was naming what had happened. Not as a misunderstanding. Not as an overreaction. But as injury. The word carried weight. So I began asking for my records. For the operative notes. For timestamps. For the EMT's initial assessments. I didn't tell anyone yet, not even my friends, but something inside me had changed. Not out of vengeance. Out of clarity. This wasn't about a single joke. This wasn't about an accident. This was about a lifetime of being told I was fragile while someone else got to be reckless. And finally, there was documentation that said otherwise. When my parents visited the next day, my mother looked like she hadn't slept. She took my hand and whispered, "We didn't know it was that bad." I didn't let go of her hand, but I didn't comfort her either. Because I had been saying it was bad for hours. And they hadn't listened. Ethan came in later. Alone. Still in the same polo shirt from the lake. He looked at the monitors more than he looked at me. "I'm really sorry," he said. "I never meant." I cut him off. "Stop saying you never meant it." He blinked. "I didn't." I looked at him. "But you knew. You knew I had surgery. You knew that was the exact spot. You knew." He didn't reply. Just stared at the four-pump like it held an answer. "I was in surgery for 3 hours," I said. "They repaired internal damage. You nearly tore me open." He opened his mouth, then closed it. And I said, "It's in the report. The mechanism of injury. They wrote it down." That's when his face changed. Not in remorse. But in fear. He left the room without saying anything else. And I lay there, my stomach stitched closed, my throat dry, and my hands suddenly very steady. Because this wasn't going to be about feelings anymore. It was going to be about facts. You learn a lot about people when you stop managing their reactions. The moment I started asking specific questions about documentation, imaging, the language in the surgeon's report, my family changed. Not all at once. But the shift was immediate enough that I didn't need a therapist to point it out. My mother began using her softest voice. The one reserved for awkward weddings and long church services. Jake, honey, maybe we don't need to make a big thing out of this. Ethan feels awful. Ethan, to be clear, had not once apologized without framing it like my reaction was the problem. I barely touched you. You've always been more sensitive than most. I didn't know it would actually hurt you. He never said I'm sorry I hurt you. Only I'm sorry you got hurt. There's a difference. And once you hear it, you can't unhear it. I didn't argue. I didn't try to convince anyone anymore. Instead, I started writing things down. The day I was discharged, I walked out of that hospital with a thick manila folder full of documentation, blood work, scans, surgeon's notes, the EMT report, and a calm clarity I hadn't felt in years. At home, I made copies. Scanned them. Backed them up. Flagged the lines that mattered. Injury pattern consistent with applied force to weaken abdominal wall. Delay between injury and treatment resulted in increased hemorrhage risk. Not feelings. Not interpretation. Not family dynamics. Just evidence. And suddenly, the conversation started changing. My father called me one night and asked, very casually, if I was planning to move on from all this. I asked, why? He paused. Well, Ethan's worried. You know. That you might make this into a legal thing. I didn't reply. I just said, is he? And the silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. They were scared. Not because I was angry, but because I was calm. A week later, Ethan texted me. Can we talk? Not about blame. Just about fixing this. I didn't reply. I forwarded the message to my lawyer. Yes. I had retained one. Quietly. She was the kind of attorney who didn't blink when I described what had happened. She didn't flinch when I said it was my brother. She just asked for dates, medical records, witness names, and if I'd preserved the text messages. Then she said the sentence that flipped the entire dynamic on its head. This is a strong civil case. Possibly personal injury, depending how you want to approach it. I didn't want revenge. I wanted record. I wanted the facts to hold. I wanted the next time someone said, it was just a joke, to come with a dollar amount attached to it. Not for spite, but for weight. My lawyer explained that family cases rarely succeed in criminal court unless there's video or a neutral witness. But civil cases? Civil cases only need evidence, injury, and negligence. I had all three. And when we sent the demand letter outlining the injury, the medical findings, and the calculated damages, the tone changed overnight. My parents stopped calling. Ethan went quiet. And I felt something I hadn't in years. Power. Not power over them. Power with myself. The number on the demand letter wasn't outrageous. That was the point. My lawyer was strategic. Measured. She calculated the cost of the surgery, the hospital stay, the imaging, the physical therapy, the lost work hours. She added reasonable pain and suffering, not dramatic, just precise. And that made it more terrifying. Because a reasonable number is harder to fight. It looks like math, not emotion. Ethan's response came through a lawyer of his own, defensive, dismissive, poorly worded. They claimed it had been horseplay, and that any injury was unintended. My lawyer responded with the surgeon's exact quote. This type of rupture requires external force applied to a surgically compromised site. It does not happen spontaneously. The pattern is consistent with targeted torque. Targeted torque. Try laughing that off. Ethan didn't. He panicked. That's when the family summit was proposed. My mother called, voice trembling, and asked if we could all just talk this through like adults. No lawyers? She added quickly, like the word itself was radioactive. I asked her, was there a surgeon in the room when Ethan lifted me? She said no. I said, then the only adult conversation I'm interested in is one that starts with accountability, not damage control. She cried. My father got on the phone next and did the thing he always does, tries to reframe things as misunderstandings. Ethan loves you, Jake. He's just not thoughtful sometimes. This could ruin his future. I said. He almost ended mine. Another silence. Then my father said something that, to this day, makes my stomach turn. Are you sure you didn't overreact in the moment? I mean, you've always been kind of delicate. Delicate. The word cracked something open in me. I thought about being 6 years old, Ethan pushing me off a bunk bed, and me apologizing because he cried louder. I thought about being 14, him slamming me into the locker. As a joke, and my dad laughing from across the gym. I thought about being 29, recovering from real surgery, telling my family about it, and watching Ethan roll his eyes when I said I couldn't carry anything over 20 pounds. And now I was being told I was delicate. After surgery. After stitches. After internal bleeding. Not injured. Not traumatized. Delicate. I said nothing. Just hung up. 2 hours later, Ethan texted me directly. This is gonna tear our family apart. Is that really what you want? I stared at the screen and thought, it already tore something. Inside me. What I want is a record. Something permanent. Something that outlasts gaslighting. Something they can't rewrite later with group texts and family photos. So I sent my reply. I want mediation. I want a signed settlement. I want acknowledgement. Or we go to court. He never responded. But his lawyer did. Mediation was scheduled within the week. And for the first time, my family had to sit at a table where my pain was the agenda, not the punchline. Mediation didn't feel dramatic. That's what made it so effective. There was no yelling. No storming out. No grand gestures. Just a rectangular room that smelled faintly of industrial carpet cleaner and burnt coffee, a stack of folders, and a mediator with the emotional expression of a DMV clerk who'd seen it all. Ethan arrived first with his attorney, dressed in a suit that didn't quite fit his shoulders and an expression that tried for calm but settled somewhere between contempt and nausea. My parents showed up 5 minutes later. My mother looked like she'd been up all night crying. My father looked like he was preparing for a hostile takeover. I didn't stand when they entered. I didn't hug anyone. I nodded once. That was it. My lawyer placed our binder gently on the table. The sound it made felt louder than it was. The mediator introduced everyone, laid out the process, and reminded us that this wasn't a courtroom. It was confidential. It was binding. And we were here for one thing, resolution. Then he invited Ethan to speak. Big mistake. Ethan cleared his throat and launched into a statement that sounded like it had been rehearsed in the mirror too many times. He described what happened as a playful moment. He said he didn't apply real force. He said I'd laughed right afterward. And that no one thought I was hurt. My lawyer let him finish. Didn't interrupt. Then she opened the binder. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't editorialize. She read from the surgeon's report. She read the phrase, traumatic rupture. She read the phrase, mechanism of injury, direct torque. She read timestamps showing the delay in treatment. She quoted the EMTs. Patient presents with signs of internal bleeding, likely abdominal trauma. And then she slid over the photo. The scan. The one where my abdominal wall looked like someone had taken a fist to a paper lantern. The room went still. Ethan's lawyer coughed. My mother started crying softly. My father rubbed his temples like this was a spreadsheet error that just needed correcting. Ethan didn't say a word. The mediator turned to me. Do you want to say anything? I said. It wasn't a joke. That was it. We took a recess after that. My lawyer and I stepped outside while the others stayed inside, whispering furiously across the table. She said, they're going to settle. They just realized how bad this looks. I nodded. Are you okay? She asked. No, I said honestly. But I will be. When we returned, the number hadn't changed. The breakdown hadn't changed. But their tone had. My mother asked if we could include something about how much Ethan cared. My lawyer replied, we can include the medical findings. And a statement of responsibility. My father asked if we could include confidentiality. We agreed, within limits. I wouldn't speak publicly. But the record stayed intact. The truth stayed intact. And then Ethan, who hadn't looked me in the eye since I entered, asked one final thing. If we agree to this, will you let it go? I looked right at him. I already did. The second you decided your entertainment was more important than my body. He flinched like I'd hit him. But I hadn't. The truth had. The moment Ethan signed the agreement, something shifted in the air. Not relief. Not closure. Just a quiet finality, like a door clicking shut after too many years left ajar. The mediator collected signatures. My lawyer reviewed each line for accuracy. The room didn't erupt in emotion or apology or reconciliation. It just ended. Ethan's hands trembled as he initialed the statement of responsibility, the part that confirmed, legally, factually, that his actions had caused the injury. Not indirectly. Not emotionally. Physically. The wording had been negotiated carefully. Applied force to a previously compromised area resulting in medical trauma and emergency surgical intervention. It wasn't flowery. It wasn't angry. It was clinical. And that was the point. Afterward, my parents followed me into the hallway. My mother tried to hug me. I stepped back. She said, "This doesn't feel like healing." I said, "That's because healing isn't something you feel. It's something you do." She cried. Again. My father stood behind her, stiff as always, like he was calculating whether silence or indignation would preserve more dignity. He chose silence. Smart move. Ethan never looked up. Not once. He stared at the floor like it might offer him a different outcome. We all walked out of that office building into the same overcast parking lot, but something fundamental had changed. I had my copy of the signed agreement in a sealed envelope. A quiet weight in my hand that said, "You're not crazy. You're not dramatic. This happened. And it mattered." Back home, I set the envelope in a drawer next to the scan, the operative report, the timeline I had written the day after surgery. And then I slept for 12 hours straight. I woke up sore, but a different kind of sore. Not from trauma. From recovery. In the weeks that followed, Ethan stopped texting. My parents tried once or twice to check in, but I didn't engage. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't spiteful. I was just done. No more explanations. No more defending my pain. No more shrinking myself for the sake of keeping the peace. 1 year after the settlement, I took a long walk on the same trail I used to run before the surgery. I moved slower now, more carefully, but with more trust in my own body than I'd ever felt growing up. I paused at a bench halfway through, lifted my shirt slightly, and traced the scar on my side with one finger. It had faded to a pale line. But it held. Like me. If you're reading this because you've ever been told your pain was too much, or your reactions were too sensitive, I want you to know something. You are not fragile. You were made to feel that way by people who benefited from your silence. And the moment you name it, document it, stand by it, even if your voice shakes, they lose control of the story. He called it a joke. The surgeon called it trauma. The law called it liability. I called it enough. And now? I move through the world intact. No permission required. Update 1 year later. I didn't expect peace to feel so quiet. Not triumphant. Not cinematic. Just quiet. A year after mediation, the final payment from the settlement cleared. The money wasn't life-changing, but the message it carried was. It said, "You were right. This happened. And we can't pretend it didn't." That mattered more than anything they could have said to my face. I haven't spoken to Ethan since that day in the mediation room. Not a word. No calls. No messages. Just silence. He's still out there, probably spinning a softer version of the story to anyone who will listen. "We had a misunderstanding, my brother took things too far, lawyers got involved." But here's the thing about silence. When you stop performing for other people's comfort, they lose their script. My parents reach out every few months, cautiously. My mother sent me a birthday card that said, "Thinking of you always," and nothing else. My father called once on a Sunday and left a voicemail about the weather. I didn't call back. Not out of spite. Out of protection. I no longer go to family holidays. I no longer explain why. I don't attend gatherings where things are back to normal. Because normal was the lie that almost killed me. Instead, I built my own rhythm. I started therapy again, not crisis therapy, but the kind where you build. Where you learn how to trust yourself in quiet moments, how to say no without explaining, how to stop rewriting your own story to make everyone else look better. I moved apartments closer to the park. I run again, gently. Slowly. But I run. And I chose people. People who ask instead of assume. People who notice instead of override. People who believe you the first time you say, "That hurt." The scar is still there. Pale, curved, a reminder. I don't hide it anymore. It's not shame. It's evidence. Sometimes I catch myself watching other people interact, at a party, in a cafe, at a family picnic, and I notice dynamics I used to live inside. Jokes that land too hard. Laughter that swallows discomfort. Someone flinching and brushing it off. I don't interrupt. I don't overstep. But I see it. And seeing it reminds me, you don't know anyone your silence to keep the peace. When people ask what happened with my brother, I don't give them the story they expect. I say calmly, he hurt me. I held him accountable. We're no longer close. And that's all. Because the power now lives in brevity. I don't need them to understand. I just need them to know. I'm safe now. Because I chose the truth. And the truth held.